Well, at Skyfall, we usually have a very diverse subject matter. So we're going to have something we've never had before. I think y'all are going to be a little, some people may be a little ill, and some people may like it. But I think it's an important truth that needs to come forth. I just now met Christine Carr, but my wife and daughter went to the Alabama legislative days that they have for the Alabama Republican women. I guess it was a couple of years ago, or was it 23? And they heard Christine speak on this subject, and it was just awesome. And so we invited her here, and we want to hear this topic. And I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to let her dig into it. But here's what I say about everything: listen. Take in the information and then check for yourself. Do your own research, and as the Bereans, to figure out if those things are so, right? So that's what we do about everything. You're supposed to check me, check Pastor Troy. You don't just go, hey, Pastor Dean said it, so we're going with it. Don't do that. You better know it's the truth. And, that's why sometimes I even get information. I get information from good sources, and I still double check, sometimes triple check to make sure. And even then, I've had to go back and go, that was not right. I have to retract that and correct that. And if I get something wrong publicly, I correct it publicly. So anyway, I know we still got a few coming in, but Christine, if you would come on up, and we'll turn it over to you. Are we using this? Are y'all using this computer up here, or are you just going to be clicking and looking at the screen? I don't know.
Clicking and licking.
Okay.
That's what you said. I love it. I think I'm going to, hold a microphone and use the clicker all at the same time. Multi-talented, perhaps. So I think it's perfect. By profession, I'm a nurse anesthesiologist, and so a lot of people say, well, you're the one that puts people to sleep. And I say, well, more importantly, I'm the one that wakes them up, It's what I call job security, right? Can't be one and done. And so here we are, right after lunch, having some delicious food, and it's the afternoon, and you're going to be a little snoozy. So I hope it's just not me being able to put you to sleep. So we'll hopefully stay awake and talk about this interesting subject. So in addition to, in my professional life, working in high stress, trauma, anesthesia, pain management, surgery, intensive care units, all of those things. There's a lot of things in my life that led me up probably to this point. This was not anything on my radar that I ever expected to discuss or to become an expert on, but that is usually the way God handles our lives, the unexpected, right? And I actually grew up an Air Force brat, moved around a lot, but I grew up in a period of time, in those wonderful rockin' 80s, and at my time of life when I was extremely impressionable in this 8, 9, and 10 years of age. It was the highlight of the Reagan era, Reagan running for re-election. My dad is in the Air Force in a division called the Strategic Air Command, which is the division that's always on alert, vigilance, ready for World War III. And that was the kind of life, that experience that I had. Church was kind of in and out, but I knew at a very young age that I loved my country, hated communism, loved freedom. And I knew actually, as a very young girl, my earliest memories, that I loved Jesus. And I can't remember how this specifically came, but I still remember at the age of between 2 and 3, having visions of Jesus on a white horse coming down out of the sky. I did not read the book of Revelation until I was 15. Putting two together. So I just knew and fiercely loved him and fiercely knew that Satan was my enemy. Went through different types of churches. It wasn't really regular. I didn't really understand what it meant to become a Christian until a little bit later. But when I was 9, I knew what it meant to become a Republican. And one of the things, just the order sometimes of things. So one of the most piercing things to me was that time, because it was a re-election era and these things were being talked about around the dinner table, and I pick up on things in the news. I was a precocious reader anyway, and so I started to learn about abortion. And I'm telling you, when you're 9 years old and you learn about abortion and what that means, that is emotionally traumatic. It just floored me. I could not understand. I could not understand it. And so I knew then, okay, so in addition to communism and taxes and all the other things, that was something that pierced me deeply. Backing up a little bit, as a young child too, when I was an early reader, and one of the first books I remember reading was the story about the king with no clothes. Do you remember that story? Right? And I remember thinking to myself, I was around 3.5 to 4, reading that story. I just couldn't believe that the crowd would follow this nonsense, because I believed that adults knew what they were doing, right? We go through this transition at some point in time where we realize, the adults didn't really know. They didn't understand. So I remember, as a young child, not only I knew I loved Jesus, hated Satan, I knew that I wanted to grow up and be like that little boy in that story. That I always wanted to be the person that could recognize when the crowd was going after folly. And that I would also have the courage to speak up. So then we fast forward, and I just told you about my political indoctrination as a kid. And the things that made sense as a kid, they still make sense today, right? And then it wasn't until I was 14, and I went through a period of time in those middle school years where I was in a bit of rebellion in my heart, and I drifted away from God. But I was curious about spirituality-related stuff, and it started to become evident to me that there is a world out there and that there is real darkness. So I started to get hungry again and started to seek and start reading my Bible and reading devotionals and start going to church again with friends. And it was one night in my room when I was 14, and I read out of Romans chapter 10. But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, even in thy mouth and in thy heart. That is the word of faith which we preach, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. I was floored. I said to myself, is it really that simple? Oh, no problem. Because remember, I'm an Air Force brat. I'm in the military. I've, by this time, learned how to shoot M16s and throw concussion grenades and went on survival exercises with my dad. That was normal stuff. I understood the chain of command, and I understood that when the command says it, they mean it, and you obey. And I knew I loved Jesus. I knew he was right. I knew the Bible was a gift to mankind, and finally read those words, and it was the most amazing thing. I got out of my bed, got on my knees. I didn't even know what sins to confess. I just knew I needed him, and I was broken and lost without him. And thank God in his graciousness, I'm sure you've experienced this over time, he starts to show you the things you give up, right? The things that you give back to him, the things you don't do anymore. Because once you've met Christ, you are never the same again, right? Never the same. So from that moment on, the nightmares that I had, they were gone. The feeling of there's something missing, that was gone. I had moments where sometimes I couldn't sleep and I would wake up and I saw the figure of a man at the edge of my bed. That was gone. Whatever evil was chasing me was kicked out, and I was living under the promise we find in Psalm 23, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And brother and sister, I tell you, I look at that as a personification of the Lord. You are being, yes, we know, The devil is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. But you're being tracked by goodness and mercy every single day of your life. Don't forget that, okay? Even though you may feel a darkness coming after you, he is coming after you more. So now being a teenager and wondering what am I going to do with my life, and I knew all these just different things, and I knew I was the kind of person that does not want to see the vulnerable harmed or killed. Very passionate about it. I knew that I will not be a coward, and that if I see that there's something wrong, I will speak out about it. And I knew I wanted to give my life to serving people. So at first that was in the world of medicine, and after my brother passed away when I was 16 and I saw the way the nurses cared for him and cared for his family, I knew I had to be a nurse first. I just had to do it because I just fell in love with how they gave everything to their patients. And so I went into nursing, became an RN at 19. I went through a lot of schooling really fast, went to the intensive care unit, and then went into my anesthesia specialty and have been doing that ever since. And this was an area that I did not expect to be into because my eldest son was very sick from a post-concussion syndrome. In the year 2021, we were in New Orleans getting him specialty therapy, and it saved his life. It was amazing. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy was fantastic. So I'm coming back to the Birmingham area, so excited. I wasn't paying attention to anything going on in Alabama state politics at that period of time. If you remember, 2021 was really bad. We had a changeover in the White House. We had a injection that was starting to be forced onto people, and I was trying to navigate through all of that, working in the hospital. And I was just mostly paying attention to national issues. But then I came home, and that's when I found out that for some reason, the Alabama state legislature in the Senate had already passed this medical marijuana legislation. I was shocked. I was disappointed. I had followed enough of the science happening in other states and saw the problems that were happening in other states and the way the industry was taking advantage of vulnerable people. I was concerned about the lack of good science behind it. And then I read the law, and it was just a terribly written law. It was more about the money than actually helping patients. And so I got in touch with lawmakers, asked them, is this thing really happening? They said, yes, we're really frightened about it. Spoke with some other international experts, and within less than a week, I was down in Montgomery testifying at a House Health Committee meeting, and I saw the fix was in. I could see the corruption that was going. I tried my very best. I helped a lot of conservative lawmakers. They filibustered other Republicans. We almost stopped the legislation. That year, we did run out the clock on gambling, so gambling didn't get passed that year. But it was passed. We lobbied Governor Kay Ivey to either veto it or to make amendments so that we could protect babies and children and fix some of the flaws that were in the law. She completely ignored it. And later we found out that she's received a lot of money from that industry. And so somehow I just kind of got involved with speaking about the science and speaking about the truth of why we should be concerned about this issue. And that's how I got involved with Eagle Forum. That's how I got involved with a lot of conservatives and going around the state. And I do not get paid at all to do this. Okay, so that's no conflict of interest. Thank you so much for helping take care of my travel expenses. But you can testify, I don't get paid to speak, okay? This is something that I care about because I care about our children. So that's a huge intro, right? But I just want to let you know who I am, right? So when we get into this, and we can really talk about the science and some other items related to this. And I'm so excited, too, to be here because a lot of times I go to policy meetings or healthcare or science-related meetings, and I love being able to be here because then I can bring in the gospel, I can bring in the Bible, and I can, you know what I mean? It helps so much. I just love that. So some of the key things I'm going to cover. Number one is what we call myth busting. I'm going to bust a few myths. I'm going to tell you about some good information you can read and why some cannabis can be okay and then a lot of it just really isn't. The debate about medicine, a couple of other myths, and then the next section is about some key harms. So a lot of people can agree to disagree on this subject. But what we have to pay attention to, what we must agree on that is very important, is paying attention to the impact on our brains, on our minds. You know the Lord cares about that very much. The impact on our babies, because that is a huge crisis that's developing in the exposure of babies to this preconception and during gestation, and the impact on the child. If we can't get those three things right, this is all a complete failure. And then we'll talk about scripture. We'll talk about the connection of cannabis to demonic activity. And I'll even hopefully have time to share with you some really good basic tips on naturally strengthening your God-given endocannabinoid system, which is a complete miracle in itself. All right, we ready? All right. So one more part of my story that I also want to convey to you, okay, that really impacts why I do what I do, why I drive, and why I come and speak about this. I have 4 children, and so this is my sweet little boy, Brian, and he's my youngest son, my 3rd child. Brian was born with a very, very rare immunodeficiency, genetic condition. We did not know what it was, and leading up to his life, I also on the side did a lot of teaching on nutrition, teaching parents how to feed their children. Even though I do work in Western medicine, I am very natural focused. I want you to avoid getting on medicine as much as possible. I want you to avoid seeing me in the hospital as much as possible. There's so much you can do that God has done to create your own ability to heal yourself. And so we were working, I was writing for magazines and going on Christian radio stations. And so Brian, with his immunodeficiency, we just didn't really know what was going on. And when I say I tried everything and got him to a really great place, but he was still having trouble. And so we finally found out through tests that we had not done before that he had a very rare immunodeficiency, kind of like bubble boy syndrome. And that what little bit of immune system he had was fading and he would soon have none. And so that necessitated having to go to get a bone marrow transplant. And we fought for his life for a very long period of time. And I could say that I know what it's like in being someone that fights for their patients. I know what it's like to be a mom fighting for her special needs child and all of the expenses that go with that, and the therapy visits and the doctor's visits and the nights of praying and crying. I know what it's like to be that parent stuck in a hospital room for over 10 months, and how you have to fight the doctors because you realize they stopped caring about your child and that they're done, and you have to convince them that no, they're not. And I know what it's like to hold my own child when they take their last breath. I know what it feels like to kiss his cheek for the last time before they close the coffin lid. I know what it feels like when you see them go in the ground and all you want to do is be there with them. And after he went to heaven and he was buried, going to his graveside for weeks, asking the Lord to raise him back up again. I know these things. And no, he did not die from a drug-related situation. What I'm saying is, I know what it feels like for parents that suffer for the sake of their children. And I know what it feels like to lose a child, and I don't want anyone to know that feeling. And one of the things that was so frustrating in seeing the process of this legislation get passed and seeing how other states and how the marijuana industry used parents of sick children, they use them. They haul them out in their wheelchairs, and they get really bad legislation passed off the guilt that other people feel. This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the rare instances where there are sick children that might need it. This is legislation that's trying to get in full legalization and sickness to everybody. And what I can't stand is when you try to stand up and speak the truth about concerns, all they do is call you uncompassionate. You don't have compassion. You don't care about these people. And I say, excuse me? I will not take that lying down. So I talk about my sweet boy Brian because I'm telling you, when it comes to compassion, I know. So let's keep going on. All right, the first thing that we need to do is talk about some of the myths that do surround cannabis, marijuana. And when we want to address looking at actual facts versus people with lots of anecdotal stories. Which studies do we believe? Which websites do we believe? I want to at least encourage you, and please feel free to take pictures of these slides at any time, okay? Because as you get started, these are 3 websites that are really, really good. There's a couple of more that are awesome, but we only have so much time in the day. So if you took 30 to 45 minutes to just go through these 3 websites, you would see another side. You would understand really what's going on here, at least from the biological and science side of things. So the first one we have here is ISAC. It stands for the International Academy of the Science and Impact of Cannabis. ISAC1.org. It is a true high-level doctor-run website. Doctors can go there and get free continuing education credits. There's tons of speakers. You can sign up and watch those lessons yourself, okay? It's really, really good. And they have a library with lots of articles and research papers. These are peer-reviewed research papers, and it's a little bit more trustworthy than just maybe somebody's blog post or somebody's YouTube opinion. They go through a little bit extra effort to make sure that these facts are checked out. So that's highly medical. The next one is Johnny's Ambassadors. This is a really good lay-led type website. Johnny's Ambassadors was started by a mother named Laura Stack, named after her son Johnny, who when he turned 19 started to get his own medical marijuana stuff for his anxiety, and within a year he was dead because he jumped off of a 9-story building. And these stories are common, especially when this is affecting our young, and our young are taking this. So it's really useful, entertaining. She's got good videos there, so it's just very easy to read. The next one is SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, led by Dr. Kevin Sabet. They're really, really good because they combine both science, medicine, and policy, and they analyze all the states and what the impacts of different things. It's like the more wonky level type of, and it's really good. Other websites down here, Mom Strong, Pop Pot, One Chance to Grow Up is really good. I like it. And SAMHSA and NDHSA data are the government-based sources, which is just the raw data, and you can go through it. So a lot of times people want to excuse it and say, I just thought this was medicine. And it really doesn't meet the criteria for what we call good medicine on the safety and efficacy. We've heard that a lot lately in the last few years, haven't we? Safety and efficacy. And believe me, modern medicine does not get it right all the time. And there is corruption within modern medicine as well. And I am heartbroken about that. But we do still have to try our best. Right? We still have to sift through data. Safety, efficacy, safety, efficacy. So efficacy means what? Does it work? There are some instances where cannabinoids can work on certain areas. Not as much as we think, but then the safety profile is the big question. So when we call this medicine, these are some of the thoughts. So right over here is Mark Johnson. He was president of the Colorado Physicians Society, the Colorado Academy of Physicians. And so his op-ed that came out a couple years ago, after 20 years, it's clear that marijuana is not medicine. It may be too late to reverse legalization, but let's not kid ourselves. Politics, not medicine, ruled the day. And that's what we've seen in state after state, is that it was more about politics, it was more about money. And when you go to these states where they've had it for a long period of time, the doctors regret it terribly. And unfortunately, the doctors don't have a voice anymore. They speak out and they speak out, and they can't seem to get legislation changed because the lobby is so powerful. It pushes you. California is almost considered a quasi-narco state because of this. And in his article, you can still look it up, I thought it was really interesting. He said that once Colorado passed its medical program, they had a slew of 18 to 25-year-olds coming to get their card for back pain. Now, y'all, I would love to have an 18-year-old's version of back pain. I'm just saying, right? I'll trade. Fine, go ahead. I'll take it. I don't even need a card. I'll just take your back pain, baby. So it just exposes, in a lot of these earlier adoption states, they did it badly, and we learn from their mistakes, but it's a lot of people get it for other reasons than other truly medical. And so that's what's so sad. This physician, Bobby Smith, out of Ireland, he just makes an issue out of how the industry tries to play the name game. The alcohol and tobacco industry are big investors into cannabis. Even big pharma are now big investors into cannabis because it's money. I mean, they care about money. So that's making money for them because it is an addictive substance and you're going to have repeat customers, right? So the industry tries to clean things up by calling it cannabis, cannabinoids, medical cannabinoids, and we have to be careful about the language that we use. All right, so what is actually medical marijuana? So we have this term here, medical cannabinoids, and that's like the legit medicine that you can get from an actual pharmacy, not a dispensary. Your physician can actually prescribe it. Your insurance will pay for it, and it's been around for years. So they just basically, in real medicine, you have to take a plant. You know, a lot of medicine comes from plants, and you pretty much have to isolate the one or two active ingredients. Because if you have an entire plant with its hundreds of ingredients, how can you know which one is actually working or which one is causing a bad reaction, which one is interacting with the other medicines you take? It's very, very hard to have standard things to compare it to. So in medical cannabinoids, when it goes through this FDA approval process and it's created, they know the exact dosing. They know the exact impact at that dose. They know when to expect bad effects. They know what side effects to look for. They know how it's going to interact with your other medications. So for example, if you're on a drug called warfarin, which is a blood thinner, you should never be on cannabinoids because it can extend your bleeding time if people have had strokes bleeding out in their brain. If you've ever had an organ transplant, you don't need to take cannabinoids because that will mess up your anti-rejection meds, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, when you go in these gas stations or these CBD stores or these dispensaries, they never tell you that. They never tell you how it might impact another part of your body or might impact another part of medicine. And that's really important. You shouldn't take cannabinoids if you take Tylenol regularly because both damage the liver, right? So you don't want to keep, and especially if you add alcohol to it, it's very, very bad. So the medical cannabinoids are the FDA medications. And the FDA is not perfect, but in a lot of times we need something that's going to test for safety and efficacy. Now, marijuana cannabis products, this is the stuff that the Alabama legislature passed. This is the stuff that Georgia has with its low THC oil, which I would rather prefer. It's like super low and it shouldn't cause as many problems. But this is the whole plant being processed. It's still processed, it's not natural because it's still going through chemicals, but they can't isolate out things as well as you can when you have the actual like FDA medicines from a pharmacy. These are the ones that come through dispensaries where there are problems with that. This is where you don't get a prescription, you get a card, a recommendation card, and there are a lot of other problems that can come from it. Back to these medical cannabinoids, this is a pure CBD called Epidiolex. It has been very, very helpful in reducing seizures for rare seizure conditions. And this is not a standalone. You still need your seizure medicines, but for the kids that have certain conditions and they are already on 2 medicines and they're still having a lot of seizures, this has been really, really helpful. At least 50% get 50% relief. It's not 100% all the time, but if your child is having hundreds of seizures a day, it means a lot. Some of these are THC analogs like Marinol, Sesamet, and Syndrose. Those are for people with spasticity disorders, if you have poor appetite because of cancer or AIDS, something we call cachexia, and it's for nausea for those conditions as well, for chemotherapy nausea. This is already here. You can already get this. All right. Now, the assumption is that it's set. A lot of people tell me, oh, it's settled science. Marijuana is medicine. Well, if it's so settled, then why are all of these medical organizations against it? They're not against the marijuana, the cannabis cannabinoids, medical cannabinoids, but the dispensary-related stuff. And you have, even here, the American Academy of Neurology, the American Epilepsy Society, because marijuana can actually worsen seizures. It can even cause seizures. But if you have the Epidiolex, that's the more helpful one. Even here, let's see, the International Association for the Study of Pain. In 2021, when our legislation was going through the state of Alabama, this group published huge reams of papers coming out saying, sorry y'all, marijuana is not a valid treatment for pain, especially for like osteo type pain, your knee pain, your joint pain. It can be somewhat helpful for certain types of neurogenic pains, but in very narrow situations. And after this, since 2021, the papers keep coming out saying it's just as good as placebo. Placebo can be very effective. And we also just here in our state, Department of Health, Attorney Marshal, the Alabama Fraternal Police, Academy of Pediatrics, and the American College of Pediatrics also said, no, this isn't going to be good for our society. All right, other myths. Some people think, what's the problem? It's a little bit of pot. You know, I'm not hurting anybody. Today's pot is much more concentrated. It's genetically designed to be much more potent. Back in the day, it was only about 4% THC dry weight. Now it's in the 20s. And then when you process it, you can have products that are about 100%, 80 to 100% THC, and that's where we have the problem. Now, cannabis, you can have your CBD, which is the non-psychoactive, right? You've seen that, that's cannabidiol. And then you can have your THC variants, your Delta 9, your Delta 10, your Delta 8. Those are all psychoactive, and that's where the big problem comes in, especially when you take a lot of it. So some kids think, hey, it helps me focus and study. I know that sounds a little weird. I can understand where they're coming from because pot has a really good job of cutting off your short-term memory, as some of you may have noticed of people that may use. Sometimes that can help you focus on other things, but overall memory doesn't improve. It actually worsens, your IQ goes down, and you have a harder time dealing with anxiety and depression, where sometimes they think it helps, but actually over time, it destroys your natural endocannabinoid system. It hijacks those receptors and destroys them, so you end up becoming more depressed, you end up becoming more anxious, and it is the #1 drug that helps teens commit suicide, complete their suicide attempts. So, and then when you tack on everything else, kids go through trauma, bullying, social media. It's just a terrible recipe. Let's see here. They think it's not addictive. That's not true. Youth marijuana addiction is twice as much as alcohol in the rates. Marijuana addiction is a real thing, but I've seen God heal people from it, and it is possible to get over it. One of the things that's so scary is this fact right down here. The #1 contributor to future opioid use disorder is marijuana use before age 18. That's a stat that continues to get supported by the research. And so if you want to guarantee that your kid's going to be a heroin addict someday, let them be exposed to THC before the age of 18. I don't think that's what parents want for their kids. That's certainly not what God wants for our children. Basically down here, medical marijuana is still pot. Medical versus recreational is basically meaningless because THC is THC is THC. What matters is the potency, how often you use it, and the age at which you start, okay? Those are the 3 key factors that make a difference. All right, another kind of myth is that, you know, pot's gonna help cure our opioid addiction crisis. That's not true. They actually all play in the same sandbox together. And what happens is there's something called priming the brain. So when you look at, you know, the different cells, let's say the cells in our brain, and we have lots of different receptors, a lot of the cannabinoid receptors sit very closely to our opioid receptors, and they share the same chemical signaling pathway within the cell. So when you have THC, Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10 binding to the cannabinoid receptor, it actually overwhelms not only that one, but it overwhelms your opioid receptor, and you're damaging that as well. So from what I've heard from experts that are especially pain treatment experts living in states that have legalized marijuana or like really broad medical marijuana programs, that their patients over time, and it's like within 3 months to 6 months, start craving opioids, where they genuinely don't want to be on opioids. They think using marijuana is going to help them get off of it, but they're on it for so long, they've damaged both receptors, and now they go back on opioids heavier than ever. So this thing right here is some stats out of Colorado. So Things weren't too bad. Opioid-related deaths, we had medical marijuana legalization around here, full recreational legalization right around here, and then the spike of opioid-related deaths. What I have been told by law enforcement, drug trafficking experts, and medical professionals is, one, this is an issue of priming the brain, that people crave it more, but the cartels run all together. So wherever you have a place that has looser marijuana policy, you are going to start seeing more and more fentanyl deaths. So our fentanyl crisis is not just a Chinese coming across the border, Mexico loose borders thing. It's a connection to the marijuana industry thing. And I'll piggyback off of that. The Chinese mafia is one of the #1 groups pushing illegal marijuana grows in the western part of the United States. So in Oklahoma, it's been overrun. So wherever you see this getting legalized, you will see more Chinese mafia and Chinese groups where, in China, if you're caught with this stuff, what's going to happen to you? You're in jail, you probably get executed, something happens. Here, the Chinese want us to be on drugs. Why do you think? Why do you think? When we need strong, healthy men and women and children to be sober-minded, to be sharp, to be courageous, to be ready to go at a moment's notice, spiritually or physically. They don't want us to be strong. They want us to be broken down. They want us to be sick. They want us to be high. They want us to be addicted to things. Because, as you've heard in testimonies, when you are addicted to a substance, you obviously love that more than the Lord, but you end up loving the substance more than anybody and anything else. And you will sell out your family, you sell out your children, you sell out everything for that hit. And our enemies love that for us. All right, name game, cannabis, marijuana, what is it? All right, so all marijuana is cannabis. Not all cannabis is marijuana. So people want to interchange it. You got to kind of figure out what they're talking about. Hemp is not marijuana. It is cannabis. It's really great for those stalks, for those fibers, papers, fabrics, that type of thing. They'll use a little bit of the flower to make the CBD oil. Unfortunately, they are now hyper-processing hemp plants to make that Delta-8, Delta-10, which is a crisis among our youth. Our kids are vaping it all the time, and it's causing a lot of psychosis problems. Marijuana is just a species of the cannabis genus, and that's the Delta-9 psychoactive substance. All right, let's move on. Marijuana impacts. I'm just going to throw out a few words here and go through this slide really quickly. I mentioned the endocannabinoid system. Y'all, this is amazing, amazing system that God developed for us. We have most of these receptors called CB1, CB2, all over our body, all over. And it is just, it's a beautiful system. I'm so glad we are researching it more. And a lot of now what they're talking about is people that have a chronic illness could have a low functioning endocannabinoid system. And there are ways to strengthen it and get it healthier without using these substances, which actually can destroy it. I already mentioned opioid priming. The mental health aspect, we mentioned that with depression, suicide, psychoses. It interacts with lots of medications. So you can go to drugs.com, and they usually have a really good way of helping you. You could list your medicines and see what would interact. And a lot of unintended consequences. We don't have statistically good proof for pain relief. They have increased craving for opioids. It's now known to worsen PTSD. In fact, the Veterans Affairs, the VA, says no, don't even use it for PTSD for veterans. The psychoses and schizophrenia risk is real, how it hurts our kids. Let's see here. I'll mention cannabis hyperemesis a little bit later. Highly increases risk of sudden death by heart attack or stroke and can cause a lot of blood clots too. And children getting mood disorders, suicidality, and it even causes environmental damage in a lot of its process. All right, so we're on to the brain now. So this right here is called anandamide. This is one of our natural endocannabinoids. It's actually, Ananda is taken from the Hindu Sanskrit. For for the word for bliss, because, in Hinduism, I'll mention this later, was very, very heavy into marijuana use for its religious purposes. So, but it's our natural. And, it's kind of like when you get that natural endorphin, natural high, and it's a beautiful thing. Chemically, it fits with our CB receptors perfectly, right? Because it was designed by God for us to make in our body and work in those receptors just right. Unfortunately, THC is kind of a copycat fraud of anandamide. And I liken it to the desperate boyfriend that just won't ever let go. Or you could say the girlfriend. Okay, so to be fair, THC molecule will get onto those receptors and they will just stay. And they will stay, and they will stay, and it stimulates your cells, and then overstimulates that receptor, and that's why over time it destroys the receptors, and that's why you need more. That's why all of a sudden people who maybe been using THC for a couple of months, and they felt fine, out of the blue they have anxiety, they have depression, they have fear, they have demonic visions, and they're really, really scared. It's because finally, the dam broke. There was damage to the receptors, but praise God, we have it in our system to rebuild that again. So it's God can heal you from it completely. All right, so on the brain, when we have THC causing problems, the anandamide is going to help it. The THC will damage it. The psychoses, the schizophrenia, and the violence is the scariest part. Marijuana use can result in psychoses, violent psychosis, schizophrenia, and reveal changes even detectable by brain imaging. I've seen these images. It looks like an Alzheimer's brain, especially for teens and veterans exposed. Daily use increases schizophrenia risk 5 times. It's especially worse when you're young. And a few examples of these moments of violence. The Colorado Halloween shooter in the movie theater, a California pot grower, he killed his wife and cut her up and stuffed her into a hole, and then went through the town shooting up schools and anybody. On one use, a girlfriend stabbed her boyfriend to death. A California mother killed her 3 children. I mean, there's so many stories. The only thing they had in their body was THC. Other more recent parts of like the mass violence, mass shooting, the Uvalde school shooting, he was a regular marijuana user. The Chicago July 4th shooting that happened that same year, he's a regular marijuana user. The Nashville transgender shooter, she was on marijuana and psychiatric meds. And to piggyback off of this, we are seeing a lot where regular marijuana use among the young is fueling some of this transgender confusion, because it will create confusion, because it will create confusion in the brain. So that's something to be watching out for and looking at more studies. And right here, I thought this was interesting. The Colorado attorney, who is dubbed the father of the marijuana legislation in Colorado, this is in the paper. You can pull this up. Officially regrets legalization after he lost his right to practice law due to his marijuana-induced psychotic and violent outbursts in public. So he was a hero and then became a zero. And he just said, oops, my bad, I'm sorry. But 10 years later, it's still legal, and so people are still having problems. The depression, suicidality, we've already talked about. #1 drug for completed teen suicide in Colorado. It has replaced alcohol since 2012. You will have more depression. Unfortunately, in the Alabama law, you can get a medical marijuana card for depression, or panic disorder, or PTSD. So we're hoping to change that, because this is literally going to kill people. All right, just mentioning her, this sweet lady here, Bertha. I love Bertha. Bertha Madras is the director of the Harvard Brain Science Initiative. And you've got to watch her speeches. She's on that Isaac website. She's on the board of that website. She came down to Alabama in 2023. I'm here with Uni Smith, who's the president of Eagle Forum, and here's Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth. We were introducing him to Bertha because I've been regularly trying to educate lawmakers on the concerns about this legislation and what's going to happen when it starts to come up and running. So she came down to Alabama to talk to a bunch of teachers and youth workers about the latest research, and so she came over to the Alabama House. and she met legislators. She met Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth to talk about the damage to the brain. And she's the one that is really, really good about being able to explain what THC does to the brain. So I just love her. She's great. This is very typical. This is a beautiful woman named Zoe who was a Miss Alabama in one of those different kinds of Miss Alabama pageants. She was a conservative media personality and living in Florida. And she took a couple of THC gummies and developed a psychosis and jumped off the 4th floor balcony and died. 5-year-old daughter at the time. This happens all the time. Also impacting the brain is what you do when you drive. Now, Alabama does not do a great job at collecting data, but the Alabama Department of Forensics did collect this data for me, and they took 6 months in the year 2021, and about half the counties report substance abuse related to motor vehicle accidents and deaths. And so right here, the top drugs in DUI arrests and crashes. The number 1, cannabis, more than alcohol. And then this is drug fatalities, traffic fatalities. Number 2, already marijuana. This is 2021. We haven't even opened up the first dispensary yet, and we are already seeing injury, harm, mortality, and morbidity coming from this. Real quick, CBD is not psychoactive, but it's not perfect either. So I just want to, when we're talking about the impact on the brain, there are some studies now coming out. Because all cannabis is what we call lipophilic, do y'all know what that means? It loves fat. And so that's kind of the problem. And when people say, well, what's the difference between cannabis and alcohol? Well, alcohol is damaging, but it gets out of the system. Cannabis loves to hang out and be with you for a long, long time. If you have a fat cell, they're going to find it, and they're going to sit there. And we happen to have a lot of fat in the brain. We have a lot of fat in the testes. We have a lot of fat in the ovaries. And those are the places that cannabis loves to live for a long time. Well, cannabis, no matter if it's CBD or THC, is toxic to the DNA, and it's also toxic to certain really particularly important organelle in the cells called mitochondria. Have y'all heard of mitochondria? It's kind of been talked about more and more, and I'm so thankful because I love the mitochondria. I really, I could talk to you today. This is amazing. You want healthy mitochondria. You need healthy mitochondria. After 30, you start losing mitochondria, you start losing muscle mass, you start losing energy. We are now finding out that unhealthy mitochondria is a precursor to cancer. So you want healthy mitochondria. Unfortunately, cannabis is toxic to mitochondria. So this study is showing that even CBD impairs brain mitochondrial metabolism and neuronal integrity. That just means the shape of your nerve cells, okay? So now this is with rats, so let's keep that in mind. We couldn't really do this experiment on humans. That would not be okay. So they did find, now this was high doses of CBD, that it damaged the mitochondria and it caused cell death. They think that it could be a precursor to dementia, early brain death, that type of thing. But to be fair, this was like high doses. So if you were using just pure CBD without any THC in it, I would recommend that you go as low a dose as possible, use it for maybe 3 months, and then come off of it, okay? And I don't necessarily recommend it because of other reasons I'll tell you later. But if you were going to, low, short, just, as minimal as possible. All right, the baby, this is so important. Cannabis and babies do not mix, but we are seeing pregnant women and pre-pregnant women using this all the time. And I'm telling you right now, I get to be with fellow believers, and we all understand the meaning of something called generational curse, don't we? I declare cannabis is the best biological example of a generational curse. And so what we see happening in the baby, we see in this big study that was done, and it's a continuing study, women that use during pregnancy, even if their babies are not born with birth defects, even if their babies aren't born with immediate problems, when they hit pre-puberty, many of them have a disproportionate amount of behavioral problems, learning disorders, and are much more likely to have behavioral problems and mental disorders for the rest of their life. It damages the baby at every stage. Lower IQs, lower birth rate, Marijuana use worsens autism scores, and in fact, we now know that marijuana use causes autism, not just from the mom, but also from the dad. This is past month marijuana use, so say in Florida, listen y'all, Florida's a mess. We don't want to be like Florida. As soon as they started their medical program, the industry sued them to the tune of $62 million. Ron DeSantis said uncle, and then they finally caved and opened up a lot of their legislation, and the use among pregnant women increased by 400%. This is a paper that is showing the incidence of, like, say, marijuana use and then autism rates. And they had a lot of studies showing correlation, but now they can say it's causation because of what they've seen studied in the lab and what they've seen over time in the country. It's now causative. And so what they can find here now is, at this period of time, this was a few years ago, the combination of marijuana use and autism rates very, very low to very, very high. And they now have predictive value. So you can now, if you know the situation in a state, whether it's not legal at all, whether it's just medical, or whether it's full legal, you can almost predict the rates of autism that we will have in the state. And that is terrible for the child, for the parents, for the healthcare system. I love my sweet autism babies, but we want the best for our children. But the dads aren't off the hook. Men that use marijuana cause damage to their sperm on epigenetic changes. And epigenetic is the fancy science term for generational, right? And they pass this on, and they increase autism risk by almost 40%. So women, you know, I would be very cautious if I married somebody that had past use. I would say stop using as soon as possible to allow regeneration of new healthy sperm so you can have healthy babies. Let's go ahead and go on. Knitted in the womb. We know we are knitted in the womb. We know by science there are at least 14 different pathways of what we call the knitting, especially that happens in those first few weeks of a baby developing. Cannabis interrupts at least 8 of those. And this is a list of birth defects that can happen when a developing baby is exposed. And I'm sorry, here's some pictures. So anencephaly, various congenital heart disorders, holoprosencephaly, which is anywhere from a cleft palate to full-on cyclops. Most babies aren't born. They can't survive this. It interrupts the development of your limbs, fingers, toes, the gut system, your trachea, your esophagus, dead bowel, and having your bowel borne on the outside of your body, and different forms of myelomeningocele and spina bifida, just to name a few. Another new study that came out here was showing that, and it's because of this key molecule inside all cannabis, so it doesn't matter if it's CBD, CBG, THC, A, B, C, D, F, G, I don't care. Olevitol is in all of it. You can't have cannabis without this, and this is what is the most toxic to the DNA. We've already talked about how cannabis is lipophilic. It hangs out in the fat. And so what happens then is this study was so, groundbreaking. I'm sorry, I have it kind of like off the chart there. But in the conclusion, they're saying data suggests that cannabinoids, including THC and cannabidiol, are important community carcinogens, exceeding the effects of tobacco or alcohol. They're saying cannabis is more cancerous than alcohol or tobacco. Testicular, prostatic, and ovarian tumors indicate mutagenic corruption of the germline in both sexes, meaning it damages the reproductive organs. Pediatric tumorigenesis, that means tumors forming in kids. Confirms transgenerational oncogenesis, that means you're now passing on cancer genes. Quantitative criteria implying causality are filled. They're saying their data is so strong, it's not correlation, it's causation. I'm not so sure about that. I reached out to some really smart biostatisticians, and they say to them it looks more high correlation than causation, but still, knowing the damage it can cause, if there's a chance that you using is damaging your sperm and your eggs to pass on future cancer to your future children, is it worth it? Most common pediatric cancers they see are increasing in high cannabis states, AML, CML, ALL. And these are all the other well-known cancers. Pancreatic cancer in women is the fastest kind of growing cancer because of now women using cannabis so much. It's scary, y'all. The child, we have more accidents, accidental ingestions, abuse, and addiction. I'm going to speed through here because I know I'm running out of time. More addicted than opioids for children. Adolescents are more higher risk. This is a child that was at somebody's house, and she took a few bites of this THC chocolate. The parents down the street had no idea and ended up in the hospital. This happens all the time. And we don't think about it, but cannabis is very highly related to child abuse deaths. All states are required by federal law to report the deaths of children from abuse or neglect, but not all states look at what substances were involved. There's only about 4 or 5 that do this, and I'm trying to get Alabama to be one of them. But I do have data from Florida and from Texas. So here's Texas. A few years ago, the number one substance involved in the death of a child from abuse or neglect, marijuana. The second was none, an unknown, then alcohol, then all the other drugs. This is Florida, number 1. And then number 2, we've got just other and alcohol. It just stands out everywhere you go. A lot of times it can be due to neglect because the parents forget to feed their kids. They don't take care of where the guns are. They don't pay attention to the dog that ate their kid's face off. Drownings, they leave their kids in a hot car. And then you do have those with violent outbursts that just outright beat their children to death. Or you have situations like this. This is common. Another form of abuse that I didn't realize until last year, which shocked me, is that THC gummies, marijuana gummies, are the top candy of choice for traffickers. And this is a situation, I'm so sorry if I'm talking with children present, but this is a gang of very highly successful professional child traffickers who specialized in creating child pornography. And they would get their medical marijuana cards, they had all their gummies together, and they would feed them to the children because it's the ideal drug for making a child compliant while keeping them conscious and breathing to do what they want them to do. So supporting the industry without extremely tight regulations or having it at all, we are feeding the beast. We are feeding an evil beast. All right, so what does the Bible say about cannabis? Really nothing, okay? But it does have a lot to say about being sober. It has a lot to say about being vigilant. It has a lot to say about avoiding drunkenness, being filled with the Holy Spirit, about not being like pagans. So we can infer a lot by looking at the data and by reading the scriptures in its context and its entirety. So there's lots of scriptures we could go from. I've just picked a few. So, of course, as the theme today is be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. I know you're familiar with that verse, and we know it's true. And when you read the entire chapter, it fits all into its context even more, because we're being advised here by Peter that we really have to be out on the outlook and pay attention. So to be sober, I love the use of these two words together, sober and vigilant, because to be sober means we're free. We're free from intoxicating influences. And in 1 Corinthians, 2 Timothy, Titus, and again in 1 Peter, other areas, a lot more verses that talk about being sober, being sober, being sober. Be free from intoxicating influences, whatever they may be. Because if you're not sober, how can you be vigilant? And vigilance, that's a key word for me, because in being a nurse anesthesiologist, I have to be vigilant all the time. Because is my patient sober? No. Y'all, they're out, okay? They've been given fentanyl. They've been given anesthesia drugs. Somebody has to be watching over them with vigilance. I can't be on my phone. I can't be off talking to somebody. I can't be typing things on my computer all the time. It's watchful and alert at all times. To be awake, to be alert. And we need our moms and we need our dads and we need our church to be vigilant. It's an action word, isn't it? It's not a passive word. It's an active word. If you check your house before you go to bed at night, are my doors locked? If you're checking, hopefully your kids don't have a phone, but at a certain age when they get one, you're checking it, right? You've got everything on there, watching all the things all the time. You're checking, you're vigilant. Who are your kids' friends? If they're going to go to somebody's house, what's going on in that house? That's good parenting. That's vigilance. But as Christians, we must be vigilant spiritually because we do have an enemy prowling around, seeking to devour us. And if we are not sober, we cannot be vigilant, and we are vulnerable. Another set of verses here. What know ye not, that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For ye are bought. We are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. We sometimes forget that in our independent, freedom-loving, but y'all, we are not our own. We were bought by Jesus, weren't we? We were bought by Jesus. We can't forget that. And I'm so glad we were bought by Jesus. And because this body is a temple, it belongs to him. And because we love him, we want to honor him with the very best we can give. In what we eat, drink, abstain from, or use, it all matters. It all matters. A couple of more verses. I just love, especially the transition from Old Testament to New Testament. In the Old Testament, how did God abide? It was in a physical temple they had to build, right? Or it was in a tent as they wandered the desert. One of the greatest joys of the entire universe, the history of the entire universe, was the fact that God did not have to come into a tent or a temple anymore. He came into the flesh as Jesus Christ. It's the most amazing, incredible miracle of all. And it wasn't just to reside in the flesh of Jesus Christ, because he has designed it so that he resides in our flesh too. And not in our flesh, but he resides in the body of Christ, the church. So we are the temple as together as the church and as in our own individual body. This is an amazing plan he's had for us. It's just incredible. And he wants to reside in us. We know there are other spirits and demons and evil things that want a body, don't they? They want something to house in. But God does too. I want that. I want that. And I want to honor that. All right. Let's see here. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. Why did I bring this up? Because a lot of people might want to make an excuse in the church, and this has been very concerning because we see in society the normalization of cannabis use more than others. We still don't accept tripping on LSD or using magic mushrooms or other psychedelics. It's still kind of taboo. But cannabis, marijuana use has become so normalized, unfortunately, especially in the church, and people are thinking that they can just burn a bowl or hit a bong and worship Jesus and have Bible study all at the same time, and I say, no way. No, you cannot do that. Because if you went out onto I-85 and got hit by a Mack truck, would you look the same? If you meet Jesus, are you going to look the same? Are you going to be the same? You are not. And so a lot of times when we make excuses for the things we do and we say, oh, I can do this with Jesus, I'm saying you have not touched his power yet, because he has the power to radically transform you. He has the power to transform you over principalities. He has the power over all principalities, all of them. He has power over false doctrines or towers of false belief. He has power over every demon. He has power over every sickness. He has power over every principality that wants to limit your closeness with the Father. That's the power you need. And if you are just walking around with a form of godliness without the power, there's a problem, and that needs to get addressed, right? Don't listen to that mess. And then there's power to be totally transformed. And we know in Romans 12:2, power to be transformed in the mind, but also power to be transformed in the body. Okay? We don't need cannabis to get closer to God. And so drugs and demons, we know, we've heard of the Rastafarians. They use it for special spiritual to connect with spirits. We know what those are. Satanists love to use this to connect with Satan. And a big history right here is with Hinduism. It was used a lot by ancient yogis to connect with Shiva, who we know, I think you recognize that name, powerful demon. And they would receive inspiration from the spirits to write the Veda scriptures, which lead people into false doctrines like reincarnation, bliss or nirvana, merging with the God consciousness. And I've heard this in a lot of testimonies of Christians that were using marijuana either before they became a Christian or sometimes while they became a Christian, and they said it was drawing them away from Christ and more into the Eastern religions type thing, that has a tendency to do that. Ancient China even talks about, in their ancient documents, cannabis being used to commune with devils and spirits. There's a connection with Eastern mysticism. But let's look back at the Bible. Cannabis, or any psychedelic, okay, anything, the pagans were the ones that had to use drugs to get connected with spirits. God has never required, encouraged, prescribed anything necessary, mind-altering to connect with him. In the Old Testament, there were very clear rules, right? And thank the Lord that Jesus came, because through Jesus, that's how we get to the Father. We don't need a drug to get to God. It is only through Jesus. And anything else claiming to be a substitute to enhance your closeness with God is a false doctrine. Do not listen to it. Humility, prayer, fasting, confession, obedience, those are the type of characteristics that grow our relationship with God, right? Not drugs, not drugs. So I'm going to go ahead and finish. All right. Do we have time for alternatives? Am I running too long? 2 minutes? Okay. I'm so sorry. I squeezed all this onto a slide, but listen, we have an amazing endocannabinoid system. There are ways you can strengthen it yourself. Whether you need to be off marijuana and cannabis to heal, or whether you're just, hey, I don't feel that great physically sometimes, I need to do better. Whatever it is, your endocannabinoid system is awesome. So here's a couple of natural, non-weird ways to help strengthen this system. Have y'all heard of cold plunge? Okay. Who wants to do that? I know. So you got to get used to it. I'm like, 30 seconds of cold shower after the warm shower, that's about all I can tolerate. Or like I wash my face in cold water. Some people go all in. Okay, good for you. But it actually stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system and actually tones up your endocannabinoid system. All right, diet is huge. I can stay after and talk to you about this, guys. Diet. Gut health, good nutrition, get rid of the processed stuff, the high processed seed oils. The diet is so important. Get off the junk. The inflammation that causes in your body and the sickness is so important. So I mentioned healthy fats, omega-3s. Get off the sugars and processed carbs. Flavonoids from the fruit and vegetables, sulfurans from vegetables. DIM is a offshoot of that. Great for anybody in menopause or hormonal trouble. Gut health. Tea and coffee is fine, just in mediation. Green tea, a little bit of coffee, don't go over, but that also helps the endocannabinoid system. Exercise. Don't stress your body out and don't injure yourself, but you must be doing this regularly. This actually strengthens the endocannabinoid system. Stress management. If you don't get a handle on your stress, it will actually hurt your endocannabinoid system and make everything worse, make you sick. Some good prayer, deep breathing, fasting, all those things are strong for you. Supplements. I do encourage methylated B vitamins, vitamin D, K2, probiotics for good gut health. Turmeric is a good anti-inflammatory and strengthens the endocannabinoid. And we need magnesium. Epsom salts, supplements like magnesium glycinate, are really, really good to supplement the important nutrition we need for the body to heal itself. And I'll finish with this. This is a sad situation. On Facebook, there's a cannabis hyperemesis syndrome support group. It's got 30,000 members. It's also called scromating. So people who use for a few months or a few years or a few decades, they end up getting this syndrome where they vomit uncontrollably and have stomach pain and scream, and it's terrible. And it can kill people. And just the other day, there was this girl that said, "Dear CH sufferers and caregivers, it is with great sadness that I report the loss of my fiance to this illness. He had stopped breathing at home, and I had to call 911 and do CPR on him. Please be aware this illness gets worse over time, and when you think you can ride out another episode at home, please don't." She said, due to his episodes every 3 months, it was difficult for him to manage his mental well-being, work, and home. He eventually, she said, suffered cardiac arrest, went to kidney failure, And you go into kidney failure a lot with this because you're vomiting all the time and you can't stop. So it does kill. Not instantly like fentanyl, but it is something that Jesus never needed. Never needed it. And I just want to encourage you to do your research and come to us if you need prayer. And I look forward to talking to you later. Thanks for your attention and time. I really appreciate it. Oh, that's yours. You got it? Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, really good. Wasn't that good? You know, this is something, too, that I've been wanting to look into more myself, and especially after my wife got to hear Christine speak at that event, and because it is a big issue in our society right now, and we need to deal with it. But I can tell you this, and when she was on the spiritual part about the demonic part and how all the pagan rituals and occult rituals and stuff, how they use marijuana and different drugs, I know for a fact, you know, I've told the story how I got saved when I was like 11 years old, 12 years old, and I was truly born again then. And then as I got in my teenage years, of course, got away from the Lord. And some of you have heard me say this, but every single time I tried a new drug, and I was one of those experimenters, but when I tried marijuana the first time, I felt the demons come. When I did cocaine the first time, I felt the demons come in me. When I did mushrooms the first time, I felt it. When I did LSD the first time, I felt it. I even had, at the height of doing the mushrooms and the LSD time, I was completely sober. I wasn't even doing the drugs, and a demon stood beside my bed, flew up over me, and went in me. And I thought, you know, my brother thought I was dreaming, but I was wide awake watching this happen, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was 16 years old. I'll never forget it. So you can say what you want to say, but it's opening a door to the demonic realm if you're playing with this stuff, okay?